I remember it being very surreal and asking myself several times in the course of the meeting, is this really happening?
Now, there are a couple of things that we should point out here. 30 years is a long time. 3 decades is a long time. And so I think we have most of the details of what happened and what was said, or at least the area it was said. Maybe they're a little bit out of order because I didn't write anything down that day. I went back to work. But I do know that we did ask for some identification. And this was what was so weird about the meeting. We ask for identification and we get told, if the deal comes together, then you'll get it. And I remember thinking, that's just so crazy. How can we make a deal with somebody that won't tell us who they are?
Yeah.
It just made no sense. And we went back and forth on that enough that I think you and I probably had one of those knowing glances exchanged where we thought, okay, let's just go with it. Yeah. The guy's not going to tell us right now. He said something else, by the way, early on in the meeting that I thought was odd. Or maybe it was JC, but somebody said that they had done some preliminary background checks on it, which was so strange. But they implied that they were preliminary and that the real thing would happen if we agreed to make a deal. They were really going to look into us, which also is deeply uncomfortable, saying a guy that won't tell you his name is going to do a serious background check on you. Listen, at that point, you're probably thinking, what about the Harrington story? I'm thinking about, if you do a background check, are you going to call everybody I went to college with? That's not going to be a good look for me. And in fact, I remember the guy that was called the captain even acted like, yeah, you probably won't pass that. He was just so diffident. He was just so snarky. We were told by this captain character, don't ask us any more about dates or places. That's not what this meeting is about. And that happened. And we also brought up the idea, because, again, if you're going to say you got a lot of things right, we're thinking about JFK and Roswell. So we query them about that relationship between these two things. And as I was thinking about this last week, prepping for this, Brent, I remembered very clearly that this guy cut us off. And he said 2 words, not today. Let me give you some pro arguments for taking a deal with these guys at the time. We thought access obviously could give us more authenticity for the show. We were idealistic, potentially. We thought, wow, if this actually is on the level, we might actually help facilitate real disclosure, which was positive. And also, given that, as we talked about in a previous episode, we started the whole cover of fiction thing, the idea that somebody would want to come to us with a desire to use cover of fiction wasn't as unreasonable as you might think. But I think the main argument pro was, we'll finally get to know what's really going on.
We'll get the truth. And that was seemed to be the promise, I think the negatives were primarily that it felt like we would be losing control of the narrative. What I mean by that is, we had a show. We had a vision for the show. We had the network on board, the studio on board. We had stories broken, scripts written, and these guys being put in charge, they had, certainly the captain made it quite clear that if we were in business with him, he was going to tell us what was going to happen. He was going to be the showrunner in some sense of the word. And I think that was terrifying, that sense, that loss of control. I think another thing that we talked about and we had to take seriously was, okay, these guys are saying this is the truth. They're saying they're the heroes, right? And we're going to be on their side and disclose to the people. Again, they were giving us the pitch of us being Lowengarde in Dark Skies. Let's get the truth out to the people. So that was enticing, but we also did consider, but what if all of this is a psyop? What if all of this is a lie? What if all of this is disinformation? And so that idea that we could end up taking a deal, lose control of the show, and only to be being used as part of a disinformation campaign was pretty disgusting.
I'm Bryce Zabel. Have you ever wondered if there's a secret connection between Hollywood and UFOs?
And I'm Brent Friedman. You are listening to Sound, Light, and Frequency.
All right, what we're going to be talking about today is the second beat, if you will, of what happened after JC crashed the Dark Skies premiere party. And I know that some people think, well, you don't have to refresh our memories on that. We got it. We've listened to your previous episodes. But the thing is, so many new people are coming to this podcast that a little bit of refreshment has to happen just to set the stage. So here's the least I feel like you need to know about this. We're talking about the events that happened during the NBC series Dark Skies that we created. And in our very first episode of this podcast, we told you the story about a guy named JC who crashed our premiere party, told us he'd seen the series, said he was from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and that we did things pretty well and they wanted to make a deal with us. That's your backstory.
Yes.
Do I need any more? Is that okay?
There's a little thing called the formula thrown in there, but that's not relevant right now.
Yeah, it is relevant in that people would say, okay, let's see the formula, which we are getting to. We even have a date for it. We're going to be putting it out there on the literal 30th anniversary episode of this, September 17th, 2026. You will see the formula and hear our panel talk about it. But the other thing we're going to promise you is we are going to tell you what the deal was, what we thought about it, and what action we took about it. So, all right. I guess what you could say is what seemed like a bizarre one-night encounter suddenly became this organized, deliberate, and harder to dismiss storyline, Brent. I don't know how else to say it, because we basically saw JC go off into the shadows at that Dark Skies party, and we went to the office 2 days later, which was our warehouse in North Hollywood. And I don't even remember if we've told this before. Stop me if I have, but this production facility was actually a warehouse in North Hollywood that had been a place dedicated to making porn movies. Did we ever say that?
We haven't said that, but yes. And I remember that we discovered that when there was a really interesting little treasure trove of stuff in the office bathroom that you used.
Okay. All right. This at least starts with a little bit of humor and degradation. So I was an executive producer of the show, and offices were given, and I got this nice big office, and I was pretty happy with it and had worked there several weeks. We did know that it had been used for making porn movies, but there was really no reason to know that other than somebody had told us when they rented it to us. And on the way to the bathroom, there were a number of, what would you call it? Just
cabinets.
Cabinets. That's the word, cabinet. Up above. So in fact, nobody had ever looked in them because they were so high up, and I didn't have a ladder or anything, and I had other things to do, as did you. And I remember one day one of our assistants had a ladder, and I said, bring that in here. Let's see whatever. And we opened it up, and Brent, there were hundreds of the most graphic porn magazines I've ever seen. Not with titles like Playboy and things like that. Now, those are nice. These were pretty radical porn magazines. And I said to the assistant, oh man, you got to get these out of here, right? So make these disappear, as I believe the mandate that he was given. And later that afternoon, somebody came and said, oh my God, have you seen what's out by the garbage cans? And apparently our assistant had left them out there. And when people said, what are these? He said, they're from Bryce's office. So that was the office that a lot of this stuff went down in, which gives it a little bit of a humorous angle. But the point is, we went to that office, our production facility, the Monday after this Dark Skies party where this JC character had shown up. And I know that we had received the formula that was written on the back of a bank envelope, and that's the thing we'll be talking about in future episodes, or at least showing people. And we went in with it, and we showed it to certain people. Anyway, so this was strange. However, we had to keep moving on with our lives. Right? There was a show to produce. We had obviously just debuted. All eyes were on us. The network, the studio, everybody's looking at ratings and discussing whether we had the right thing. And we were shooting, and our next episode up was about Roswell and JFK in the aftermath of the assassination, where literally our main character, John Loengard, goes to Dallas, Texas, and talks to Jesse Marcel from Roswell.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Crazy. So against all of that, basically business as usual on a primetime TV series, I was getting messages from my assistant, Adam, saying JC called. Now, he had given us his card at the party. And if you remember, it said simply J.C. with a 310 number. We did not call him. We had other things to do. I don't think we'd made a decision one way or another what we wanted to do, but we certainly weren't taking action upon it. But he was quite aggressive after the party in following up several times. And at some point, probably by the third or fourth time I got a message that JC was calling from Adam, I went and took the call. And he made some sort of quip about you're a hard man to get on the phone or something along those lines, but was still pretty friendly and said, hey, we want to follow up. And I hope you guys had some time to think about it. And we'd love to have another meeting. And I am being asked to bring a superior to this next meeting so we can get into a little bit more details and see if we can close this thing up. And I thought, okay, but we're busy. And he said, okay, so we're going to be there tomorrow at 3:00 and we'll see you then. I was like, hold on. And all of a sudden it was like click. And next thing I knew, he was coming to the office. And I remember with a little dread having to come and tell you, oh, I just made a meeting with JC and his superior to talk further about the deal. And he'll be here tomorrow. Tell you,
and I think we both felt the same way. The pressure of doing a television series, especially in the days right after your premiere, is ungodly. What people have to understand is not only do you have a show on the air, you have shows that are still being written, you have shows that are going into pre-production, you have a show in production, you have a first cut of something that needs to be looked at, you have a show that needs to air in 10 days or something. So you just have so many things going on. I can't tell you that I wasn't interested. I'm not going to say I didn't want to meet with the guy. I was curious. First of all, the most real thing about him coming to our party is he had actually seen our pilot. So, yeah, you kind of wanted to know more just as a human being who's got curiosity. And me being a guy that came out of journalism, I was like, yeah, I want to take this guy's assessment. So, listen, you and I are both veteran writers who've gone to our share of pitches, and we've been exposed to egos like you can't believe and strange Hollywood personalities. All of that is certainly true. But this was a meeting unlike anything I've had.
I know we were trying to figure out how do you prepare for this? And ultimately, I think all we came up with was, look, let's make an agreement between the two of us. We're not going to commit to anything in the room. We're going to hear them out. We're not going to say yes or no to the deal. Whatever happens, we're just going to hear them out, and that was it. And I think that was, aside from a lot of angst and probably not a good night's sleep for on either of our parts, that was about all the preparation we could really do for that meeting.
So let's set the stage physically for this thing. So aside from the colorful detail of cabinets full of porn magazines, next to that office was a conference room. And this conference room, like a lot of them, it was down a hallway, but it was adjacent to my office. And frankly, just around the corner from yours. You and I were very close together.
Yep.
And it had a big, clear window. And so we knew two things. We knew that everyone would be able to see that we were meeting with somebody. So if something really untoward was happening, people would see it.
Hopefully, yes. That was the thinking.
Yeah. And we also knew that we had security.
Yes,
at the production offices. And so we were able to tell our security guys, hey, some people say they're coming in this afternoon. We'd like you to pay extra special attention and stand menacingly outside the conference room, if at all possible. So they did. Yeah. And these guys showed up promptly on time, JC, and I guess we have to discuss what the other guy looked like. I'll let you take a crack at that.
So as a refresher, or if you're new to Sound, Light, and Frequency, JC himself was, we are saying, around 30. He looked slightly handsome. He looked like a cross between a frat boy and a young military man, and very pleasant in his demeanor. The same cannot be said for the person that we will now refer to as the captain. The captain came in all badass. He had the demeanor of a drill sergeant, and we were the grunts. And he came in, he was much more physically imposing than JC. He had on, if I remember, a Navy bomber jacket with all sorts of insignias and patches and things. But I think just casual pants. He wasn't in full uniform, I guess is what I'm saying.
He had jeans on, because one detail I remember is he wore boots. And I had forgotten this detail, but they weren't boots that were scuffed up with cow dung or anything. They seemed to be lightly dusted with sand or something. I just remember they weren't cleanly polished. They were sandy.
Yeah, had the real feel of an off-duty officer. He came in, and there wasn't any real chit chat. It was, we got right down to business. And the one thing I want to frame this with is the whole meeting, from my point of view, had a good cop, bad cop quality to it. Clearly, JC, who was the one that first made contact with us, was the good cop. And he was the one who was always trying to lighten the situation throughout this meeting or get it back on track. Whereas the captain clearly embraced the bad cop role in many ways, which we'll lay out.
People have asked, who were these guys? What were their names? Did you see their ID or whatever? We did ask for their names this time. I think we were both taken aback at the party and probably not thinking with all our critical faculties, but we had a little time and forewarning about this one. The one detail I want to just add to that is, I don't know that we actually in the meeting called them the captain. I think he was introduced as the captain, and we never called him by anything. But I do remember thinking very strongly that he reminded me of a Navy SEAL. He looked like what you'd expect. Yeah. Whereas JC was slight, not a wimp or anything like that, but a normal guy.
If I had to assess them, I'd say that JC gave off intelligence officer vibes, and the captain was clearly a military man.
Yeah, keep those two things in mind, folks, because what we're about to tell you is what went on in this meeting that, in my remembrance, Brent, about an hour and a half. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes, and it went by rather quickly. I remember it being very surreal and asking myself several times in the course of the meeting, is this really happening?
Now, there are a couple of things that we should point out here. 30 years is a long time. 3 decades is a long time. And so I think we have most of the details of what happened and what was said, or at least the area it was said, maybe either a little bit out of order because I didn't write anything down that day. I went back to work. But I do know that we did ask for some identification. And this was what was so weird about the meeting. We ask for identification and we get told, if the deal comes together, then you'll get it. And I remember thinking, that's just so crazy. How can we make a deal with somebody that won't tell us who they are? Yeah. It just made no sense. And we went back and forth on that enough that I think you and I probably had one of those knowing glances exchanged where we thought, okay, let's just go with it. Yeah. The guy's not going to tell us right now. He said something else, by the way, early on in the meeting that I thought was odd. Or maybe it was JC, but somebody said that they had done some preliminary background checks on it, which was so strange. But they implied that they were preliminary and that the real thing would happen if we agreed to make a deal. They were really going to look into us, which also is deeply uncomfortable, saying a guy that won't tell you his name is going to do a serious background check on you. Listen, at that point, you're probably thinking, what about the Harrington story? I'm thinking about, if you do a background check, are you going to call everybody I went to college with? That's not going to be a good look for me. And in fact, I remember the guy that was called the captain even acted like, yeah, you probably won't pass that. He was just so diffident. He was just so snarky.
He did give off this energy of, why do I have to be here? I felt like JC and he were told, go back and have a meeting with these guys and figure out if we're going to do this or not. And the captain probably rolled his eyes and said, you could just tell he did not respect Hollywood. He didn't want to be there. And he had very little confidence in us, it seemed to be.
Whereas JC seemed like he was there, but he was clearly outranked. So as we get into this, there were questions that were asked, etc. But they weren't answered by JC first ever. It was either the captain either said something or he dismissed it, and then JC said something. But let's throw something of substance out there. I believe in the late 80s, there was a TV documentary called UFO Cover-Up Live. And that's the one people famously remember because there were some shadow interviews from people supposedly in the cover-up, and they were talking about having an extraterrestrial biological entity in custody that famously liked strawberry ice cream. Okay, which a very specific thing, okay? And there's a whole background on UFO Cover-Up Live that we don't have time to go into. Let's just say that we knew that had happened because it was about 5-6 years prior to this meeting we're having at Dark Skies. But one of the things that UFO Cover-Up did is it introduced the concept of the aviary, which was a faction of the Air Force.
Correct.
Not too subtle, aviary, birds flying around. But where it got weird for us and why we invoked that is these guys said that they were part of the aquarium.
Yes. And the implication, so obviously aquarium, Navy, aviary, Air Force, the implication that they put forward to us was that the aquarium were the good guys. They were the people working for disclosure, coming out, making deals with people in Hollywood to slow drip the truth through the media and condition people, give them a soft landing, all of those euphemisms. Whereas the Air Force wanted the cover-up, was definitely actively working to keep things covered up. And we didn't get into the specifics of why. I think in the intervening years, there's talk that there's more of a religious viewpoint of the phenomenon and aliens and everything in the Air Force. And so they wanted to keep it secret. Whatever the case may be, it was clear that JC and the captain were presenting themselves as the good guys in this battle, and they wanted to recruit us to be part of the good team.
In fairness, I have to tell you, over the years where I've told partial tidbits of this story, or at least asked people, I do remember multiple people, when I said aquarium, they kind of laughed. Like that was funny to them. And I think that their attitude, and in fact our attitude at the time, was maybe this is all just disinformation. Yeah. Maybe these guys are here to find out how gullible Friedman and Zabel really are. And we didn't get hung up on that issue, but it did come out there. So what happened is, at this conference room thing, the captain was just, yes, JC had said, you got a lot of things right. The captain was there to tell us what we didn't get right. And what we didn't get right was this ganglion, which was a biological thing that embedded itself into somebody's brain. And right. And I remember him specifically saying, and you and I have used this phrase over the years several times when talking about this. He said, that's not the way it works.
Yeah. And I remember when he said that, he said it with such disdain. He actually made me think of Frank Bach, our captain, our Navy captain character in Dark Skies. It felt like we were getting chastised by one of our own characters at that moment.
Yeah, and Frank Bach was played by the late actor J.T. Walsh, who was, in a future episode, we'll talk about what a seriously troubled dude this guy was. His character was mean and nasty, and so was the actor, at least at that time of his life. To say that he reminded you of Frank Bach, scary. The reason we hired J.T. Walsh, remember, was
he was intimidating.
He was intimidating. And when we first said, when it was in casting, can we get J.T. Walsh to play Frank Bach? And people were like, no, he's a major guy. You make it a J.T. Walsh type of actor. Right. And we said, can't you just ask? And we did, and they gave it to him. Another thing, by the way, that came up, because it was so much on our minds. Because remember, the pilot is about the Roswell piece being given to JFK. And the first episode now is literally merging the Roswell story into the aftermath of the assassination in Dallas. So Roswell was on our minds. Maybe it's because I was a reformed journalist at that point, but I had questions. So I thought, if these guys are going to play this game, let's at least find out. They want to know what we know. I want to know what they know. If they're telling us there's a deal to be had, then maybe they should dangle some of this information out here, because if they're not even going to tell us their names yet, JC did, or at least he gave us a name. Yeah. Anyway, the idea that Roswell was an anomalous event did get acknowledged in this meeting. But we were told by this captain character, don't ask us any more about dates or places. That's not what this meeting is about. And that happened. And we also brought up the idea, because, again, if you're going to say you got a lot of things right, we're thinking about JFK and Roswell. So we query them about that relationship between these two things. And as I was thinking about this last week, prepping for this, Brent, I remembered very clearly that this guy cut us off. And he said 2 words, not today.
Yes. No, but I remember thinking at the time, he didn't poo-poo it like he did the ganglion. He didn't confirm nor deny that there was a relationship between JFK and Roswell. He just said, not today. Because as it turned out, they had pressing business they wanted to talk with us about.
And by the way, just to show you that I don't take no for an answer, sometimes to my own detriment, after having said not today, what was on my mind was we were actually in the middle of breaking a story about Socorro, New Mexico.
Oh, right,
and that would become an episode. I believe Jim Perriott wrote it. And it was called Hostile Convergence. And so we were in the middle of a lot of those writers' room discussions about how to make this happen. So I asked him something about it. And again, just shut down. with I don't remember the specifics, but it would have been something like not on the agenda. The guy was terse and negative, not on the agenda. And one other thing that came up, I'm just giving the content stuff here. I believe another thing that came up was clearly the abduction phenomenon, because in the pilot, we had Betty and Barney Hill as characters in it, right? And then also in the pilot, John Loneguard's girlfriend, Kim Sayers, was abducted herself. Right. So abductions were a pretty major thing. And he seemed to acknowledge that. He seemed to acknowledge that not only was happening, but they were clearly tinkering with our DNA. And I might be wrong about this one, so I'm kind of curious if your recollection matches it. One of us, might have been you even, but somebody said, how long has this been going on? Is this a long-term thing, or is this something that just started with Betty and Barney? And again, he dismissed it and moved on by saying something like, next.
Yeah, no, that actually topic, I'm pretty sure it was me that tried to probe on that because it interested me greatly. But he just wasn't, like I said, he was not interested in answering our questions. This was one of those things where you're being interrogated by a cop and you're trying to ask questions to the cop and they say, no, I asked the questions, right? In this case, he was trying to run the meeting and we were flailing for answers, right? Because we've got two people suddenly on the inside. We're trying to get anything we can out of this meeting. And he is just intent on taking it exactly where he wants to go.
And we are going to get to that in 1 second, but I wrote one other thing down that I recall really pissed him off, right? Because remember, these guys had acknowledged we're from the Office of Naval Intelligence, which, by the way, is historically a thing. Bob Lazar, his story was tied to Office of Naval Intelligence people. And later, if we have time, we'll talk about John Lear and how he acknowledged that. So I think our question was, if you're from the Office of Naval Intelligence, why are you guys in charge of things that are flying around in the skies? What about the things in the oceans, which now is a hot topic, USOs, unidentified submerged objects? So that was not a question this gentleman wanted to hear. He did, though, by my recollection, want to know what we were going to do about that. We're rewriting some episodes because he hadn't seen any yet, which was so disturbing that this guy knew more about what was coming up in the show potentially than some network executives that we had, right? So he's not seeing it in the show. And if my fault at that time in that meeting, as I was a little too practical. So I went into this dissertation about how it's very difficult to shoot on water and you got to get water tanks. I'm talking about the production part of all of that. And he was not satisfied at all about that. And then I think he did get to the thing he wanted to talk about.
Yes. So I guess let's get into the meat of the meeting here. So here's what happened. As Bryce pointed out, these guys had seen our pilot. They had seemingly looked at our briefing book, and there was an understanding that we were going to be taking the show into space. Our season 2 was largely focused on all of the moon flights, the moon missions. And we had a whole alternate history storyline around that.
Let me just add one point to that and then run with it. Our first season ended in 1967 in the Summer of Love. And that was a little different than what our Bible said. We thought we were going to go decade by decade, but we found out there were so many things happening that we only got by our 20th hour of production to the Summer of Love. And what we were going to start the next season with was 1968, which is still considered one of the toughest years in American history. And we were going to move through at least to Watergate, which was 1974, which means the whole Apollo program would have been part of it.
Yeah. So they had some awareness based on our Bible that we were going to go there, out into space, as it were. And I remember there was some declaration of we're going to have to move that up. You're going to have to get to that sooner because what's going on, and this is where he went from not answering any questions to basically getting up on his high horse and telling us what the whole point from his, or from the Office of Naval Intelligence purview, the whole point of the UAP phenomenon was, which is it's all about the moon. And I remember thinking, what? We had some ideas, and there were certainly conspiracy theories about the moon landings being faked and whatnot, but I had never contemplated that, as he said, it was all about the moon. So this really came out of left field, but he then went on to explain that the reason that it was all about the moon is that there are others. I think that was his word for aliens. I know specifically he never used the word aliens. He used others. And he said there are others who are using the moon as a staging ground for various activities that included manufacturing, mining, all sorts of stuff for some sort of metamaterial that was being used to produce craft. I think that was what he said, that was coming and going from Earth to the moon. And he said this with such kind of matter-of-fact confidence that when I heard this, I thought, whoa, okay, so that's what's going on. He sold it really well in the room.
He did.
Yeah.
By the way, just as a sidebar, when Richard Dolan and I wrote AD After Disclosure, we were wondering what to call these aliens or NHI or whatever. And remember, Whitley Strieber had called them the visitors. And so we can't call them the visitors. And we don't want to call them aliens because what if they're not aliens? What if they're time travelers? Or what if they're interdimensionals or whatever? So I hearkened back to that and suggested to Rich we call them the others. And that's what's in the AD book. But this thing takes a radical turn, though, because confident as he was and overwhelming as that may have seemed, and you make a good point. It felt, I guess I have to believe that. But I totally did not at that point. Right? I don't remember what questions I was asking, but it just was like, wait a minute, what? What are you talking about? I don't think I was as verbal about that, but you can sort of read a guy in a room. We were trying to read them, they were reading us, and I probably had that look on my face of, what are you talking about? And I recall at that point, he pulled out a little vial, a little glass vial. And you've seen these, they're little sample vials. They're tiny, had a black screw top on the top. And it had something in it, and I'm going to let you go with that.
Yeah, so when we questioned him about the moon being the center of everything, he again got annoyed, reached into his coat pocket and took out this little vial and like almost slammed it down on the table and said, "This is what it's all about." And both you and I were looking at it like, what's in this little vial? And that's the explanation for Roswell and the cover-up and everything else. Like, okay. And I know we each took a turn picking it up and looking at it. What I remember is picking it up and seeing that it had what looked like to me fool's gold. Fool's gold is something that actually looks more like gold than actual gold. It was more like this brightish yellow, but it was like it was flaky. It was like gold flakes almost. And I remember looking at it and shaking it to see, okay, how light is this stuff? And everything like a snow globe just fluttered throughout the little vial, except there was no liquid in it. I'm kind of shaking it and it's all just fluttering, right? So either this vial was some sort of a vacuum or there was some strange quality to this stuff, but there was nothing really spectacular about it other than it was just this kind of gold metamaterial apparently that had a slightly lighter than air quality to it, if you can believe that. And that was it. That was the entire piece of evidence that he was willing to share with us.
Pretty light evidence, if you will. Now, I don't remember the snow globe aspect. This is where, again, it's Rashomon time. Although maybe it's not even that. You looked at it, you shook it. I remember looking at it. I don't think I shook it. So what I saw was if the thing was this big, the little flakes were about that much of it, maybe a little less than half of it. And I grew up in a pretty poor family. We did not have gold lying around. No gold coins, no gold bullion, no gold flakes, no nothing. So I had no experience with what gold actually would look like, to be honest with you. I knew it as a color, but not as a substance. And I honestly can't say that it impressed me in any real way other than the fact that he thought it was so impressive. As you said, he sold it. It was challenging the way he put it out there. Of course, it was almost like I wasn't going to show it to you guys, but you're so difficult that kind of like that.
That was like, you want evidence? Fine, here's your evidence. And that was it. And that was as far as he was going to go with the explanation. I think the interesting thing, too, at that point was it brought up a lot of questions for me, what was going through my head and why I was maybe both intrigued by the story, but also probably resistant in some way was I was already fast forwarding to, oh no, we're going to have to rewrite so much. We're going to, all our whole second season, we're going to have to pull up. What are we going to do? This is going to be so much work. Because in my mind, I was already thinking, okay, I guess we're probably going to take this deal and it's going to be a ton of work. And so I was already thinking, that's a great reason not to take the deal.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a good transition, though, because that's where we kind of went back to the deal. But I just want to make one kind of overall statement. Over the years, I have heard various people tell me what they think is going on. I've heard David Grush tell me, and Coulthard and Dolan and people. We've had these conversations. And a lot of the things that I didn't hear until David Grush was holding up his hand in Congress were sort of implied in that meeting. The idea that there have been crashes. Like going back to Roswell, I think he was agreeing with Roswell, but again, he did it so dismissively. He did it like that. If you kids think that's the only time these things have crashed, then I don't know what to do about you guys, right? So there was an implication there were more than one. There was a sort of implication that there was some kind of reverse engineering. And I don't remember how it came up, but how do you think these things are, not all of them are theirs or something like that. So certain key elements that have become part of the lore were feathered in there. So I do feel like there's a consistency between what the captain said to us and what David Grush told Congress, that there's other stuff. Anyway, at a certain point, remember, JC is talking a little bit, but mostly he's letting us talk and he's letting the guy talk, right? And at a certain point on this moon thing, it got a little, I wouldn't say heated, but it was like that moment where there's 10 seconds of silence and everyone's looking at each other and you're thinking, okay, this isn't going real well. What's going to go on? And we're already over an hour into this thing, right? So at that point, my recollection is he jumps in trying to be the good cop again and trying to get this conversation moving in the right direction. He kind of blurts out, let's talk about how to move forward with this deal.
Yeah, the logistics. That was what he wanted to talk about.
Right. Now, it's so weird because with all this other stuff going on, the thing that we get hung up on in this meeting is actually funny in retrospect. But they basically were still arguing, look, we will provide you with access to certain key facts, and you will provide us with this forum for this slow drip disclosure. And so I started, when he said that, I was like, what? How would this work? And we would give you things and then they'd be typed up and you'd put them into your, it was sort of dismissive to the writing process, as it were. Now, what you have to understand is at that point, you and I had gone through a really rough thing on that. We had been forced into a Writers Guild arbitration over Dark Skies because the network, a week before production, had said to the studio, hey, let's get some guys in here. Let's get another writing team in here to punch up a couple of the scenes. And so what ended up happening is people we didn't know and we weren't told about provided some dialogue for a couple of scenes, and only one line ever made it into the film, and it had something to do with the drapes in the apartment that Longard was going to be in. They said, these drapes look older than the Coolidge administration. That was their line. Suddenly, we were defending our lives with a Writers Guild arbitration.
Just to jump in quick, an arbitration, for anyone who doesn't know, is when the credit, either story credit or written by credit, on a teleplay, a screenplay, whatever it may be, is contested. That multiple people feel they deserve the credit or more credit or first position or whatever it is. And our union, which is the Writers Guild of America, basically acts as the arbitrator of that kind of contested credits case. And they bring in various writers and they say, okay, everybody read all the material and evaluate who made the big contribution and who made the smaller contribution. And then we'll figure out what the official credits are going to be.
Everybody's stuff.
Correct. And that's part of what you agree to when you join the Writers Guild, that when these things go to arbitration, you will accept the arbitration. It is therefore binding.
And it's done anonymously. The arbiters are anonymous, but so are the writers. So you and I were writer A. And we had to write a statement of writer A. We don't even know if these other guys, or actually it was, I think, a husband-wife team, I found out later, would be writer B. And listen, I found it's 7 pages long. I'm not going to read it. But the run-up, the finale to it, I think is just worth reading because it's fun. Because this was our conclusion. We wrote, the teleplay for Dark Skies is based on a concept with a Bible timeline, which runs from 75 million BC to the year 2008. It reinterprets all of human history through the prism of UFO contact with an alien parasite civilization named the Hive, bent on world domination by the millennium. In the teleplay you have read, Dark Skies begins the creation of an entire alternative history where the most important date ever occurred in our lifetimes, February 17th, 1962, the discovery of Patient Zero. The pilot script speculates on alien involvement in the shooting down of Francis Gary Powers, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and ultimately the assassination of John Kennedy. It takes the reader-viewer into a covert military organization whose activities are unknown to our leaders, much less our citizens. And then it concludes, we don't mean to be flip, but clearly this outweighs a line of dialogue about some old curtains, which I thought was one of our better written things you and I have ever written. And we also pointed out that we had done 13 drafts and all of this
At
stuff.
least,
So, okay. So,
needless to say, by the way, we got sole credit.
Yeah, we did. And the arbitration came back very quickly. I don't even know if Writer B ever even wrote something, but we felt like we had to hit him with overpowering force. So hence 7 pages. Anyway, normally not important, but it was important in our mind state at this point that sometimes you have to defend your life and you have to defend your creative input. And if we don't defend it strongly, so in the middle of preparing for production, you and I had to drop everything and write this statement to try to get credit for the pilot, which we did. And then also we got the creative buy for the TV series because of that. Anyway, so this is in my mind as this guy is telling us we're going to give you stuff. And I start asking questions about, okay, you're going to give us storylines? Do you want credit on this? What writers are you going to try to suggest writers? Because the network has their writers that they're suggesting, and the studio has writers they're suggesting, and Brent and I have writers that we're suggesting. And you want us to tell the network and the studio that, hey, we got some writers we don't want to tell you about, but they've got some good ideas. And then I think the other thing is we were feeling protective of our staff, that writers make a living and have families based on having residual fees that come
based
in
on the
from
credits that they get on the scripts. And
so we started asking him about these things. I think it was mostly me. I think you were probably in shock that I was going down this road. But this guy was getting increasingly frustrated because I was taking this thing that he was just tossing off. And I was like, no, wait, so you would then do this and then you would do that? But wait, no, we couldn't do that. We could, and right? So it got very, I don't know, what
contentious.
Am I trying to say here? Contentious.
He was not in a good mood when he arrived, and I think we worked him into a state of complete discombobulation. He was so confused and frustrated why we were now talking about Writers Guild residuals. And he made it very clear that neither he nor anyone that he worked with cared about credits or money. That's not what this was about. We've had enough. This isn't going to work. And next thing we knew, the meeting was falling apart and they were heading for the door. And that was unceremoniously, that was the end of the meeting.
Yeah, and I remember feeling almost relieved because the minute they hit the door, I got up, grabbed a cup of coffee and went back to my office and started doing whatever it is I had to do, because that's just it. If this would happen under a normal situation, if it happened to you and me today, we'd have had them walk out and then said, holy shit, can you imagine? What are they saying here? And we probably did that for a couple of minutes, but then we had scripts in production, all this stuff going on. And so we just went back to work. And so if we do an interlude here at all, it would simply be to ask ourselves what we thought of this whole moon thing. Because the moon is a seriously important thing in science fiction. It's a place where secrets are kept, right? People are either mining, or there's military on the moon, or the moon landing is faked,
or the moon is not real. It's an artificial constructed object.
Which is Roland Emmerich, who we were talking about for Independence Day. He did a movie, Moonfall, where it's falling into the earth. So there's always all these secrets about the moon, and the moon is an important thing to a lot of people. And you take a crack at it, but I do have a personal story that is not relevant to Dark Skies. But if I don't tell it right now, I'm going to hate myself. So you can run with whatever you got first.
No, If you want to, I don't want you to hate yourself. So please share your story. And
Okay, here's the thing. This is going to date me, and people that know math are going to know how old I am, and I hate that. But on the other hand, when you Google somebody these days, it tells you how old they are. So, okay, screw it. Now you know. But when I was 15 years old, I was a fry cook at the Arctic Circle restaurant in Hillsboro, Oregon. And Brent, I'd worked my way up. I started at $1.10 an hour, and I was up to $1.35 an hour, and I was feeling good. But I was also interested in space. And July 20th, 1969 was coming up, and my boss, who was a Basque separatist immigrant who had come to the U.S., I asked him, hey, his name was Mariano Bilbao. And I said, Mariano, I'd like to have the night. They put the schedule up, and I was scheduled to work on that night. And I said, I really feel like I'd like to see the moon landing, right? So can I have that night off? And he goes, this is a business. No, you can't have the night off. And I said, can we put a TV in here? And he goes, TV? No, you can't put a TV in here. What about a radio? No radio. You come to work. And so because it was such a good and high-paying job, I said, okay, I'll do it. So that night comes, and it's the moon landing's happening in about 35 minutes or so. And I just can't handle it. And so I called my father at home. And my father was one of these, you had a tough dad, I had a tough dad. Not a lot of praise, a lot of criticism kind of thing, a tight emotional state on the guy. And I said, Dad, I really want to see the moon landing. Can you come pick me up? And then I hold the phone out because I know the lecture's coming. He's going to say, no, you made a commitment to that job, and by God, you've got to serve that commitment. And so I'm thinking, this is a Hail Mary, but it's not going to go anywhere. And to his credit, in kind of a wonder years kind of moment, my father says, I'll be right down.
Wow.
So I say, great. I take off my apron. I go wait outside. My father comes. I get in the car, and he goes, you'll be fired. And I'm 15 years old. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, okay, let's go. We went home. We watched the moon landing. It was everything I hoped it would be. Anyone who was alive knows what it felt like. And at the end of the moon landing, about half an hour in of watching, my father turns to me and he says, I think it's time for you to go face the music. So I get in the car. We drive back to the Arctic Circle. And there's Mariano, who's been called in, that Bryce has abandoned his post. And Mariano sees me get out of the car, and he fires me instantly. And my father, God bless him, because this is the only time I really have this great feeling about him. He looks at Mariano Bilbao, and he goes, sir, you do not understand how important this is and how it's going to change the course of human history, and you're going to feel bad about what you've done for the rest of your life. Son, get in the car. Ooh. And we went home.
Okay.
And I never worked there again, obviously. But so I guess the reason I feel like I have to tell this story, because when I think about the moon and the moon landing, it's not about where I was when I saw the moon landing. It's about where I wasn't. Right. That's my story.
That's a great story. And it's a very interesting segue into my story about the first movie I ever saw, which was 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
I will date myself as well. When the movie came out in 1968, I was 5 years old. Now, if you've seen 2001, A Space Odyssey, by the renowned director Stanley Kubrick, you'll know it is not appropriate material for a 5-year-old. But my dad took me to the Oaks Theater in Berkeley, California. I had never been in a movie theater before, right? And walking up to the balcony, I remember he wanted to sit in the balcony.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me 2001 is the first theater movie?
Theater movie that I ever saw.
Wow. That's a
at age 5 years old.
Yep.
So we're sitting in the balcony of this old theater in Berkeley, California, and just the soundtrack of that movie alone was so bombastic. We're not going to get into all of the scenes in the movie, but suffice to say that it opens up with something probably a lot of people have seen or they've seen parodies of, which is you're back in prehistory with a bunch of apes, when humans were apes, running around, picking up bones, beating each other up, killing each other. And then they find the monolith, the famous black rectangle, right, which is this iconic, mythic symbol of man's consciousness or higher consciousness or something. Anyway, these monkeys in ancient times are finding this monolith, which starts humming, and one of them throws a bone at it. And next thing, the bone spins up into the air and becomes a spaceship and we're in space. And that's how the whole movie opened. And that I say all of this because from about that point on, as a 5-year-old, I think I just went numb. I really didn't remember anything about the rest of the movie other than that. But here's the funny thing. My dad was so taken with the movie that he bought the soundtrack. And I grew up in Berkeley in the 60s, and my parents were artists and fairly young. There was a lot of partying that went on at our house. And I remember not on one occasion, but many occasions, waking up in the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning. My parents were out partying with their friends, and my dad was playing the soundtrack to 2001 at high volume. So what I was hearing were the sound of monkeys hooting and hollering and banging. And I remember so many times waking up to the sound of these monkeys screaming, right? Which explains a lot of my childhood. And so that was my 2001 experience until much later when I went back, and I've seen it many times. It's not up there with Close Encounters or Contact, where I've seen it 20 or 30, but I have seen it probably 10 times. It's a fantastic movie. We can talk a little bit about some of the things in it.
I want to talk about that soundtrack one moment, though.
Yes, please.
I owned the soundtrack as an LP, of course, an album. And I'm just telling everybody right now, if you Google 2001 soundtrack album and look for images, the back cover of the 2001 soundtrack shows a couple of astronauts looking at a tablet. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that tablet, you will see 2 letters on it, BZ. And as Bryce Zabel, BZ just...
Wow.
When I first realized that, I was in college, and we were going to see 2001 on Saturday nights. Everybody would go to the midnight show of 2001, stoned out of their minds because they wanted to see the final sequence. But I was very proud it said BZ. Listen, the film is so interesting because it suggests that humanity is part of a larger evolutionary experiment that's been guided by this unseen, non-human intelligence. And the key to it, though, Brent, is that the moon is serving as the trigger point in that process.
Yes.
So, yes, these guys in the movie go all the way to Jupiter, and that's where the Star Child and all this great ending stuff. But there's the sequence on the moon where they are excavating this thing. And so what begins as a story about space exploration, ultimately it becomes a meditation on existence itself, and the moon is positioned not as a destination, but as a silent signal that something or somebody has been watching and waiting. And that to me is why 2001, I'm with you. I've seen it at least a dozen times, possibly more.
Yeah, we've kind of read log lines. You just did a great job of encapsulating not the plot so much, but what it's about. What's the meaning of 2001? Because I think the plot would be difficult to summarize because it's a movie that's told in segments that are related, but go see the movie. It's amazing. It still holds up today. It looks as good as any movie that is out right now.
And I actually look forward to us doing an entire episode about moon movies and a long-form dissertation on 2001, but I know that we have other business to take care of. I will say there is a collection of moon movies just waiting for us to weigh in on them, but the one that's about, if you will, mining on the moon, which is what the captain was saying, this is what it's about. The most recent one that I've seen that's all about that is Moon.
Yes. Mining helium-3, wasn't it?
Yes. And I saw it last night. It holds together, folks. If you want to see a great film, Sam Rockwell is the star of it. He plays all the roles in it. And it is helium-3 that they're going after. So a fascinating thing. Now, most recently, there's been, there's Moonfall. That's the one we just talked about. Fly Me to the Moon came out a couple of years ago where they're saying it was faked. And I couldn't even watch that one because I know it wasn't faked. So I don't like to talk about that.
But on that topic, and I think this is interesting, is that when people do talk about the moon landings being faked, who do they say directed them?
Right on.
Stanley Kubrick.
You betcha.
And the reason is because the moon landings happened a year after 2001 came out. And I think a lot of people watched 2001 and it felt like watching a documentary. It felt like what everyone imagined space would look like. And so I think that no surprise when people said, how could they have pulled off these fake moon landings? Have Kubrick do it, right? He just pulled off a miracle with 2001. So obviously there's no evidence that ever happened. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about it being faked, about Kubrick, about it being an artificial structure, there being mining going on the moon. This is where we get into kind of the rabbit hole of what is really going on with the moon and asking ourselves all these years later, was there anything to what the captain told us?
Point of fact, I'm not 100% sure of this part, but when he did raise the moon as an issue, I do remember somebody saying something like in 2001, just some sidebar reference. And again, this guy being such a put-down artist saying something, if you think that the moon is all about classical music and blah, 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 then you are not as smart as you think you are, or just something like that. So, yeah. I also think, by the way, in context of your story, I believe Kubrick was asked about that and, of course, strenuously denied that it happened, that he would fake the moon landing. On the other hand, people who think the moon landing was fake would say, well, of course he'd deny it. So you can't ever get around that.
He had a sense of humor, though, because in The Shining, Danny has a sweater that says Apollo 11 on it. So clearly he was well aware of what the rumors were.
Listen, there's so much to that. And all I know is that I did a lot of research on it, as did you, and we haven't even touched the surface. So let's just resolve. We're going to come back to that. But right now, we got to resolve the captain and JC. And as we left our story, we had a situation where these guys have left, and not in a happy way. It was not a happy place where they left. And you and I had gone back to work, and time elapsed. I'm unclear how much time elapsed, because time kind of compresses when you're producing a TV series. It's like it's 24/7. You even dream about your series because you have to. Your brain has to keep working because you got to show up at 7 in the morning and keep going and stay till 9 at night and then drive home. So, so that was going on. And then something happened.
So what happened was JC resurfaced and started calling. I started getting more messages from my assistant. And why he was calling me, I can't say. I think he felt I was the easier mark.
I'm sure of that. I'm sure that's what happened.
And so I finally, once again, got on the phone with him. And this time he had a little bit more kind of edge to his voice. He wasn't quite as friendly because obviously everyone knew that last meeting hadn't gone well. And he proceeded to say that we were being given one more chance to make this deal work, and they were pulling out the big guns. I think that was some kind of strange quote like that. And what it came down to was they were going to get us a meeting with an admiral, so someone even higher up than the captain. And what I was told was that there was, I think, an aircraft carrier or some Navy vessel coming into San Pedro, which is south of Los Angeles in one of the big port areas, and was going to be coming in there in a couple days. And the admiral of that ship was going to take a personal leave from the ship and go onto shore to have a meeting with us that would not be an official meeting.
And before you lay that part out, though, let's just recall, before that call came in, you and I did have time to have a couple of conversations, right? It still weighed on us. Not so much that we thought the deal was on the table much. We were like, I guess that didn't work out. But we still were talking about what's the point of view? Should we take this deal? What would that mean? Should we not take the deal? What would that mean? So that was an active conversation that we were having. And then it got real serious because they got back in touch with us.
Correct. And so I'm listening to this proposal that we're going to be meeting with an admiral, and I was thinking, wow, God, the captain was so intimidating. I can't think of someone meeting with someone more intimidating. But then the situation took a very dark turn because I said, okay, where would we be meeting with this admiral? And he said, that's the thing. This will not be an official meeting. So after hours, he is going to request a personal leave from the ship to come visit.
And the reason, though, just to be clear, they said you can't meet him on the ship because we would have to log you guys in.
Exactly.
And you cannot be logged in. Now, that's a very convenient thing if you're not who you say you are.
Right.
To say, I can't bring you on the ship. But that seemed plausible. They're not about to log in Friedman and Zabel to meet an admiral if you're trying to keep a big secret. Okay,
right, for a Dark Skies creative meeting.
Yeah, that didn't seem reasonable.
But where he wanted to meet us was apparently the cover story that the admiral was using was he was going to go visit a friend of his, a deceased friend, and pay his respects at a nearby cemetery in Long Beach. The plan was, as JC stated it, you are going to meet the admiral at a specific gravesite, which we will give you the name of, at midnight. And all I heard was cemetery at midnight. And immediately what went into my mind was, we're going to go to this gravesite, and it's not going to be the gravesite of some friend of the admiral's. I'm going to see Brent Friedman's tombstone and Bryce Zabel's tombstone, and there's going to be 2 holes dug 6 feet deep. And as we're taking all of this in, we're going to get popped in the back of the head, and that's where we will be laid to rest. That was all of this went through my mind when he said cemetery at midnight.
Mine too, because remember, you had to come into my office and say, there's been a development. And then you had to lay that on me. Now, as I've considered this over the years, to be told we're going to have a meeting in a cemetery at midnight is crazy. It's insane.
Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of great reasons why that would be worthwhile or why it would even be done. I thought when I first heard this, my first take, Brent, was it's some kind of weird initiation.
Yeah, it felt like a test. If these guys are willing to do this, then they're either complete idiots and we own them, or they're committed and they're in and we can trust them. One of the two.
I remember saying to you, though, like, what is this? Some kind of weird initiation. You had a different take at the time. You were like, I don't know, maybe there's something buried there that they're going to show us.
Yes. At the time, I will be perfectly honest, I was completely terrified, but I was equally intrigued. And here was the good news. You had kids. I didn't have kids yet. So there was a part of me that was like, maybe I'll go. Bryce, you don't have to go. I'll go. And I think what it came down to was, no, we're in this together. Right. You're not going. I'm not going. We have a show to run. No one's going to a cemetery at midnight. Let's drop it.
I did feel like I have a wife and 3 kids. And
yes.
The least responsible thing I could do in that position was to go to a cemetery at midnight. But before we actually lay out the ending of this, let's just summarize the conversations that we had before that phone call and even a little bit after it, before as we weighed this. Let me give you some pro arguments for taking a deal with these guys at the time. We thought access obviously could give us more authenticity for the show. We were idealistic, potentially. We thought, wow, if this actually is on the level, we might actually help facilitate real disclosure, which was positive. And also, given that, as we talked about in a previous episode, we started the whole cover of fiction thing, the idea that somebody would want to come to us with a desire to use cover of fiction wasn't as unreasonable as you might think. But I think the main argument pro was, we'll finally get to know what's really going on.
We'll get the truth. And that was seemed to be the promise. Yeah.
And I do remember talking about that, I think we were sitting in my office, because it had a chair on the other side. I was behind my chair, and we would talk to each other across that big old desk that they had. And we thought, we might get to see a craft and a body.
Yes. That was the inducement. That seemed to be the promise. They never used those words, but in our minds, if we were going to go to a cemetery at midnight, it was because there was a craft and a body somewhere that we were going to be shown.
Now, you were more open to taking it, so I'm going to let you take some negative. What are the negatives to taking such a deal?
Look, I think that other than it sounds insane, I think the negatives were primarily that it felt like we would be losing control of the narrative. Right. What I mean by that is, we had a show. We had a vision for the show. We had the network on board, the studio on board. We had stories broken, scripts written. And these guys being put in charge, they had, certainly the captain made it quite clear that if we were in business with him, he was going to tell us what was going to happen. He was going to be the showrunner in some sense of the word. And I think that was terrifying, that sense, that loss of control. I think another thing that we talked about and we had to take seriously was, okay, these guys are saying this is the truth. They're saying they're the heroes, right? And we're going to be on their side and disclose to the people. Again, they were giving us the pitch of us being Lowenguard in Dark Skies. Let's get the truth out to the people. So that was enticing, but we also did consider, but what if all of this is a psyop? What if all of this is a lie? What if all of this is disinformation? And so that idea that we could end up taking a deal, lose control of the show, and only to be being used as part of a disinformation campaign was pretty disgusting. Additionally, there was the thing of, if we do take the deal and they give us information, are we going to be blackmailed at some point? Are people going to say years later, these guys didn't write the show? This was all given to them. So I think there was plenty of reasons not to do it, again, beyond just self-preservation.
I also think there was a personal reason for both of us, even though you didn't have kids. You had a skeptical spouse, as did I. And I think that it would have created a legitimate personal rift between us and our loved
Yes.
one. And that would have been a difficult thing. So I agree with that. We didn't want to be conduits for disinformation. The other thing, by the way, what if it had become public that we had done this? If we had done it, that just seemed like that is so unknowable. And it clearly weighed on both of us. And I just want to make one thing clear. We're having some fun talking about it right now. But in the moment, I was disturbed. I was disturbed that somebody, let me put it this way. I didn't know if these guys were on the level or not, but I did feel like somebody had spent a lot of time or money trying to build this situation around us. And it wasn't clear why. So if it was on the level, that would also mean that we'd be in a real troubling situation. I guess it's time. I don't think it's a mystery to anybody, but what it finally really came down to was the approach that these guys made from invading this party for the Dark Skies premiere and then coming to our offices and behaving the way they behaved, and then offering a cemetery at midnight. All of that seemed very alarming. It seemed dangerous. It was coercive. And what's the word you use? It's insane. At least it felt insane. So at the end of the day, I know my position was I've got a wife and 3 kids. I'm not meeting anybody, any human being or any non-human being at a cemetery at midnight.
We came to the same conclusion. One of the interesting things, though, is that once we came to that conclusion, the story that we told ourselves was, those guys who knows, they were probably lying, right? It was comforting to think that it was all, we did the right thing. There was no truth there. But I think a couple things to just look at in the intervening years is that obviously there's much more talk now than there was in 1996 about all sorts of stuff going on in space, in the moon, up on the moon. There's obviously been this new moon mission with Artemis, but all of the speculation about what might be going on in space or even up on the moon has reached a crescendo of late. And something that happened a couple weeks ago was Gary McKinnon, who was the famous kind of British hacker from, I believe, the 90s, was arrested when he was just a teenager for hacking into a bunch of U.S. intelligence agencies and seeing things that he was not supposed to see. And there's a whole rabbit hole we can go down that we're not going to. If you're interested, check it out. He gave an interview recently with Jesse Michaels on American Alchemy. Shout out to Jesse Michaels. Love his podcast. Anyway, in that interview, he says a couple things that actually align with what the captain told us oh so many years ago. And so, again, maybe coincidence, but I think it's interesting to start comparing some notes. Some of the things he said he saw were that he got into Fort Meade, he got into the Defense Information System Agency, the DoD networks, the Basic Army networks, the Navy networks, the UASF, the U.S. Air Force networks, and also the Johnson Space Center. This teenager hacked into all of these places, but was obviously working with very low-speed internet, so he was like trying to download all of this information. It was going very slowly. But one of the things that he saw from the Johnson Space Center a spreadsheet that was titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. And it went on to delineate something about that had ship names, and there was a material that was being transferred. There was chemicals like molybdenum, strontium, barium. There was all sorts of records of ship-to-ship transfers of materials. And for a moment, apparently, he thought, oh, they're talking about U.S. Navy ships. But when he researched it, none of these names matched up with actual Navy ships, which then implies that there was a whole kind of network of work being done up in space, none of which we are aware of or that has been officially revealed in any capacity. And so then you're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit and you say, okay, the captain told us there was mining going on the moon for some sort of material. When you start looking at these things that he laid out, all of them are these rare minerals and elements that are found in various quantities up on the moon. So again, is this all a coincidence, or are these dots starting to be connected 30 years later?
I'll connect one other dot for you.
Yeah.
After McKinnon got arrested, I'm not sure he was a teenager when he did that. I think
I'm sorry. He hacked and then he was arrested a couple years later.
Yeah. So when he got arrested, and he's a UK citizen. So when he got first arrested, the British were looking into it, and they were treating it as it's not as big a deal. But then the British sent some people over to talk to guess what? The Office of Naval Intelligence. And they came back quite chastened, and the Office of Naval Intelligence was invoked strenuously in this thing. So there's O&I again. Now, I don't think either of us are saying that these are clear connections, but I think what interests us, both of us, is that for this O&I keeps appearing as the naval intelligence name attached to secrecy and access and compartmentalization, and it fits right in with us being told, you got a lot of things right. O&I and the Navy, and So what is the status of Gary McKinnon right now, based on what he told?
The British government stood their ground and would not allow him to be extradited.
Yeah.
So he got in trouble, clearly, but he didn't. I think they were going to put him away for 50 years or something, or 70, for breaching these networks and seeing and getting access to classified information.
So Gary McKinnon's not going to Disneyland anytime soon, because he'll be picked up and arrested.
No,
it's a great story.
There's one last piece of the puzzle that we want to throw out, and it's possibly the strangest, the most unsettling, and also the most speculative. After we had turned down the deal, and by the way, we turned it down by simply not taking any more phone calls from JC. We just never allowed there to be any further communications. But about probably a week or two after the offer to go to the cemetery at midnight, I remember one day coming into the Dark Skies office, and my assistant, Adam, looked ashen-faced, and he waited until we were in the office. He closed the door, and he wanted to show me something that seemed very important, and it was a newspaper, one of those little newspapers from the west side. I don't remember, west side of Los Angeles. I don't remember which one it was, but he quickly opened it up, and he showed me an article about a body that had washed ashore down by the Santa Monica Pier that had no ID on it, but that fit the description of JC.
Oh.
And my first thought was, oh no, he couldn't close the deal, and so they took him out.
We're not alleging that, by the way. This is more speculative than cemeteries at midnight.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think the point of that is that once you get immersed in the paranoia of a situation, and by the way, in the aftermath of all this, we did start telling more people about Cemetery at Midnight and all that kind of stuff. So now people were making a show about a cover-up, but they were also feeling part of the cover-up. So now you have people seeing all sorts of strange things all over the place, and your assistant bringing you in stories about somebody showing up dead at the Santa Monica Pier. Obviously, we have no idea if that was JC or what happened to him, but it was one of those kind of punctuation marks on the whole thing that just left this sense of unsettling mystery, which really explains the whole feeling of JC and the captain and the offer and the deal and the formula. It all felt like we were in the Twilight Zone.
I really feel like Rod Serling should have been narrating our Dark Skies experience. I thought you were going to tell a slightly different story, and I know we've gone long, but I think we'd be remiss not to throw this out there. One day, after that Cemetery at Midnight moment and all that, we come to the office, and John Lear is sitting in the lobby. Lear. He has come unannounced. Now, for people who don't know, John Lear was the son of Bill Lear, who was the famed inventor who created the Lear jet business aircraft, and also the 8-track system. John Lear was a significant player in UFO history, but he was also a significant pilot. He had thousands of flight hours as a pilot. He flew more than 100 aircraft types. He worked as a test pilot. He held speed records. He knew everything about aviation, but he's also the guy that got famous with his Lear hypothesis, or the Lear statement, and I'm just going to read you a list of things that he said there and see if they ring any bells. In his statement, John Lear is the guy that said alien craft had crashed and been recovered. This is in the late 80s into early 90s. So a few years before us, but a few years after, say, Bob Lazar. Lear said bodies had been retrieved. Secret treaties existed between the U.S. and extraterrestrials. Human abductions were occurring, and underground bases were involved in joint projects with non-humans. Okay? So back when he was saying, this is crazy shit, right? And then he was talking about reverse engineering, black budgets, all that stuff. And there he is sitting in our lobby. We weren't expecting him. We let him sit in the lobby for a couple of hours because we were like, maybe he'll go away. Whatever.
But by the way, this is the son of the guy who invented the Learjet, right?
Yeah.
This is, as you said, he's got like serious credentials, and he's sitting in our lobby for several hours because we're too busy to meet with him.
The reason I bring it up in this episode, and maybe we'll go into more depth later, but he had a few things when we did meet with him, that did happen, and he had some things to say about the moon himself.
Yes, and his whole stance was the moon is artificial. It's not at all what we've been told. In fact, it's a massive artificial structure, and there are hidden civilizations operating beyond Earth, utilizing the moon, and NASA is concealing everything, all of the alien architecture and the mining that is going up on the moon. So again, we have a meeting with JC and the captain where the captain tells us it's all about the moon, and then unexpectedly, days later, a week later, whatever it was, John Lear shows up at our office to tell us about what he knows about the moon.
And it's possible that we, or maybe me, maybe you didn't do this, but maybe I didn't treat him with the proper respect because I think I was a little done with people coming into my office to tell me moon stories and stuff when we had such real responsibilities to get the show out. Because, and I couldn't find it for this show, but maybe I will find it. He wrote me a letter afterwards, and it's a pretty critical letter, basically saying, oh, I guess you guys don't want to know what's really going on. You're just too busy making your TV show or whatever. But he came out, we talked to him, and interestingly enough, he was Bob Lazar, who was the guy that said he worked at Area 51 and S4. He was Bob Lazar's biggest supporter when Lazar first told his story to George Knapp back in 1989. And in the latest Bob Lazar documentary, which just came out, it's called S4, one of the recreations based on Bob Lazar's testimony is a document they made him read when he first went there, and it's got Office of Naval Intelligence on it. My mind just spun.
Yeah, and I think let's wrap this up. I know this has gone long. This has been a crazy trip down memory lane. Going back to JC, right? Let's hope he's alive. In fact, our secret wish is that he is, and that he's listening to this podcast. And towards that end, because we're Hollywood writers, we thought it would be fun to imagine what JC is up to right now, our old friend JC. And so we have been writing and producing a little micro series called The Deal. When we launched our podcast,
when to quit, Brent. We don't know.
I know. And when we launched our podcast, we put out the first deal kind of under the radar. We just put it out there. It's on YouTube. It's on the Stellar channel. And
which, by the way, people can access at HollywoodUFOs.com.
There you go. And so the first episode, it's very short, it's less than a minute, contemplates, well, what would JC do if he heard that we had a podcast and we were telling stories about him? And so we have a 6-episode microseries in mind, the second episode of which we're going to leave you with. And we encourage you now to go back, watch the first episode, second, and they'll be running in parallel with the rest of the season. And we promise you that by the time you get to the 6th episode, it'll all fold back on itself and you'll have a fun little ride.
Why don't we let's play that right now and then come back for a goodbye.
We have a problem. Dark Skies is back on radar.
A real-life man in black, and he tells us that he's been sent by the Office of Naval Intelligence.
That deal was to be part of the government's slow drip disclosure program around UFOs.
Never told me you were O&I back then.
Has it aired yet?
Not till February 19th. It's called Sound, Light, and Frequency.
Of course it is.
It's from iHeart, so it'll be everywhere. But we have resources.
Use them.
And I said, how do you get a job like that? And he said, well, I was briefed every day for months in an underground facility in West Virginia. And I used to cry myself to sleep every night.
The first time you told me that, cry myself to sleep every night, It freaks me out today. I still get goosebumps.
Those two aren't half as smart as they think.
Friedman's gone too far this time.
All John has to say is that he was just a kid with an overactive imagination.
Too late. Politico got Harrington on the phone,
And?
and he denied even knowing him.
That won't wash.
And now Grush wants him to testify.
John's an old man. Not gonna happen. Nobody cares what I said to those clowns 30 years ago.
Maybe. But the committee's talking about a subpoena.
I should have killed that podcast when I had the chance.
Okay, that was fun. Okay, here's what I've enjoyed about doing those things, Brent, and I don't know if everyone will get our sense of humor or our sense of drama or whatever, but I have always wondered, and I'm sure you have from time to time, what would have happened if we took the deal back in 1996? Would we have been killed? Would we have been brought inside? Would we have had a Tom DeLonge done on us? I don't know what would have happened. So it's a nice little thing to see these things being made.
I've had several friends say to me, why are you poking the bear? You want this guy to come back into your life? And I will say right here and now, at this point in my life, I'm ready to talk about the deal. I'm not ready to sign anything yet, but I'm ready to have some more deeper conversations about the deal. So I hope that JC is out there listening. And JC, if you're listening to this podcast right now, get in touch with us.
Yeah, and I would just say my kids are all growing up, so I have an open mind about it now.
There you go.
Sound, Light, and Frequency is an iHeart podcast produced by Stellar Productions. It's executive produced by Nick Johnson, and for Stellar, Jackie Zabel. Our show's music was written by Anna Stumpf and Hamilton Lighthouser. And your hosts and executive producers are Bryce Zabel, that's me, and Brent Friedman. Watch the skies.